She came through the Ashenfang border at midnight. No escort, no packmark, no weapon of any kind. Just a woman moving through the dark tree line with the careful, deliberate step of someone who had made a very clear decision. Somewhere around the first day of walking, somewhere in the middle of a dense pine forest with nothing around her but silence and cold air. That collapsing was not going to happen today. The moon above her was bone white, not the soft, warm ivory of ordinary nights, not the gentle gold of festival moons, the old kind, the cold kind that the ancient wolves used to say appeared when the laws of nature themselves were paying close attention, when the world had tipped toward something significant, and the sky knew it before the people below it did. The forest had gone quiet around her, in the way that forests go quiet when something unusual is passing through. Not the peaceful quiet of deep animal sleep, the watching kind. Every bird was every creature in the undergrowth, every pine needle, still observing. Her name was Iveria. She was 24 years old. Her dark hair was loose and damp against her neck, wet from 2 evenings of cold travel air and the particular chill of crossing from one territory's tree line to another's. The dress she wore had once been ceremonial, deep blue, the color the Iron Veil Pack reserved for their most sacred rites, trimmed at the hem with silver thread that caught light when it moved. Now the hem was torn below the knee, dragging mud with every step. The silver thread was caked beyond recognition. There was dried blood at her collarbone, not from a cut, not from any wound you could find with your hands and clean with a cloth and press a bandage against. The specific kind that comes from the inside, from a bond that has been broken and left open and left unhealed, and has been working on the body like a splinter, driven deeper with each passing hour. But not visible to anyone who did not know where to look. Visible to anyone who did. She had been walking for 2 full days. Every hour of it, the broken thread in her chest had pulled and ached and worn at her. The low, dull, constant drain of something that had no intention of stopping, that sleep did not fix, and food only marginally slowed. She had stopped trying to fight it somewhere around midday of the first day. You do not fight gravity. You adjust to it and keep moving. Though she did not know she was being watched from the ridge above until she heard the boots. 3 sets. Descending fast and organized, not the panicked scramble of wolves startled from their posts, but the deliberate, smooth precision of people who had been watching for longer than she realized, and had decided the moment to move had arrived. She stopped walking. She raised both hands. The 3 wolves who stepped from the trees were large and still and fully armed, and they moved with the coordinated ease of people who had been doing this together for years. The one at the front was the biggest of the 3, broad across the shoulders, dark-eyed, with the face of someone who had been making fast decisions in difficult situations for a very long time and had gotten very good at it. His name was Haver, first warrior of the Night Roar Pack. He had stood this same ridge in rain and ice and the deep black heat of summer nights, and had seen every kind of person arrive at this border over 11 years of service. Refugees and thieves and diplomats and traders and wolves running from things they had done and wolves running from things that had been done to them. He looked at her with the steady, patient attention of someone reading a situation carefully before he moved inside it. The ceremonial dress, the mud, of the dried blood at her collarbone, the slight visible tremor in her raised hands, not from threat, from exhaustion, from 2 days of walking on reserves that had run thin. And he looked at her eyes, clear, steady, present. The eyes of someone who had used up almost everything except the particular resource that keeps you thinking straight when everything else is gone. She held his gaze without flinching or looking away. "My name is Iveria." Her voice was quiet and precise, the voice of someone who had rehearsed these exact words somewhere around the middle of the second day of walking and had chosen every one of them deliberately. "I am unarmed. I am not a threat. I am requesting an audience with Alpha Arcan Bloodfang." Haver studied her. 4 full seconds. Then, "Can you walk?" "I've been walking for 2 days," she said. "I can manage a little further." He stepped aside. He gestured toward the compound with one hand. His 2 warriors fell into step behind her, and she walked into Night Raw territory on legs that had been trembling since the second morning, with a thread burning incomplete in her chest, in a torn ceremonial dress, with nothing she had started with except her name and a piece of paper Philora had folded small enough to fit in the satchel pocket. But this story did not begin at the Ashenfang border. It did not begin on that cold ridge, or in that bone-white midnight, or with her hands raised in the dark. It began 6 weeks before that, under a different moon, in a different territory, on a night that should have been the most beautiful of Iveria's life, and instead became the wound she was still, in that moment on the ridge, still learning how to carry. To understand what she lost, you have to understand what the Iron Veil Pack was. It was beautiful, or the way things are beautiful when they have been designed by people who care deeply about being seen. The paths between buildings were polished stone, maintained year-round. The gates were ornamental as well as functional. Tall, with the Iron Veil insignia worked into the metalwork at the top in a detail so fine it required standing at exactly the right distance to see. The training grounds were kept not just functional, but arranged, yet with the specific careful order of a space built not only for use but for impression. Decorative banners hung at every official entrance. Every public space had been considered. Visitors arriving for the first time found themselves adjusting their posture, which was exactly the intended effect. The Iron Veil Pack wanted you to know, before anyone had spoken a single word, that it knew its own importance. Iveria had grown up in all of it. She had been born there. She had been a child in those polished corridors, had learned to run on those arranged training grounds. She knew which stone steps were loose. She knew which gate hinge screamed if you moved it too fast, and which council elder fell asleep in afternoon meetings, and which ones never slept at all. She knew the names of every wolf who had arrived in the pack in the last 3 years, and the names of every elder, and the names of every child who had been born in the last 5. Or she knew names because she believed people deserved to be known. Not because it was politic, because she had grown up in a place that was beautiful and organized and status-conscious, and had noticed early that the very efficiency of the place meant that some people were known less than others. The elderly, the quiet ones, the newcomers who had not yet made themselves visible. She had made a habit of them, the way other wolves made habits of other things. But she was not the loudest wolf in Iron Veil. She carried no formal rank. She had not won tournaments or achieved the kind of visible, announced excellence that the Iron Veil Pack preferred to recognize. She was the one who stayed late on the 3rd day after a new young wolf arrived from a distant pack, the one who had been homesick and exhausted and trying very hard not to show it, and quietly left a covered dish of warm food outside her door with no note attached, not to be thanked. Because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone struggling is to act as though you noticed without making them explain. Her loyalty to the people she loved ran so deep that it had a physical quality to it, solid and quiet, like deep water. People who did not understand it mistook it for softness. Those who did understand it held on to it like something rare. Her closest friend in the world was Faelora Grimhole. Faelora was 22 years old, compact, and had the specific quality of a person who has decided to take up exactly the amount of space they need, and not a single inch more or less. She had dark eyes and a ponytail, she kept practical, and an expression that cycled, depending on the situation, between sharp amusement, fierce loyalty, and the kind of cold, controlled anger that is much more frightening than the hot kind because it is organized. She had been watching Alpha King Luthar Wolfcrest for years, with the patient expression of someone who is giving a person every fair opportunity to prove them wrong, and is running low on patience. She had never said anything directly about it, because Iveria had not asked, and Faelora was not the type to offer opinions that had not been requested. But she had been watching. She was always watching. The Sacred Flame ceremony was the Iron Veil Pack's highest ritual, held once every 7 years, when the full moon sat golden above the Moonclaw Mountains, and the goddess was said to lean close to the earth and breathe the bonds into being through the sacred fire. The thread that connected fated mates was not a metaphor in the wolf world. It was real, golden, visible in the light of the ceremony flame, stretched between two people in a way that every wolf in the circle could feel, even if only the two people involved could truly see it in full. For wolves who believed, and in Iron Veil most did, this was the closest thing to direct communication with the divine that ordinary life offered. Iveria had been waiting for this night for years. She was careful with her hoping, had learned, in the quiet way that people learn these things, that the louder you hope for something, the more complicated it becomes when life moves differently than the hope did. She did not let herself want it out loud, but in the quiet of her room on long winter evenings, with the fire low and the compound settling into its nighttime sounds, she had let herself imagine it. The warmth of it. The sense of something chosen specifically for her. The evening of the ceremony, Faelora braided her hair, something she did once a year, on important occasions, with the focused concentration she brought to anything she deemed worth doing properly. When she finished, she sat back and looked at Iveria for a moment, with an expression that Iveria couldn't quite read. Something careful in it. Something held back. "Whatever happens tonight," Faelora said, "you are not defined by it." Iveria looked at her. That is a strange thing to say before a ceremony. Faelora handed her the silver earrings she had been holding and said nothing else. The ceremony fire was built from 7 specific woods, a tradition older than the pack's written records, each wood chosen for what it carried. The fire burned gold at the heart and deep amber at the edges, but the smoke from it did not smell like ordinary smoke. It smelled of something older than any ingredient that went into it. Cedar, and something underneath the cedar that had no name. Hundreds of wolves stood in a wide circle around the flame. The Moonclaw Mountains were visible to the north, the full moon above them so large and golden it seemed closer than it had any right to be. Every wolf present was in ceremonial dress. The blue and silver of Iron Veil's sacred color, depressed and prepared and worn with the awareness of what the night meant. Elder Orolith stood at the fire's edge. She was the oldest serving elder in the Iron Veil pack, silver-haired, with sharp eyes behind high cheekbones, and the bearing of a woman who has spent 40 years recording things that most people prefer not to examine too closely. She was the keeper of the archive room, where the oldest records lived in hand-copied volumes that required gloves to open. She had seen many sacred flame ceremonies. She called pairs forward one by one, and each time the golden thread appeared between them through the fire, the crowd made a small, involuntary sound, not loud, just the exhale of many people watching something real. Alpha King Luthar Wolfcrest was standing at the center of the inner circle. Iveria had seen him before. The Iron Veil pack was not so large that you avoided your Alpha. But seeing someone across a dining hall or at a distance in a council meeting is different from seeing them at close range in the full light of the ceremony fire, and the difference matters. He was everything that a pack Alpha was supposed to look like, as though someone had taken a description and built it precisely. Tall, broad across the shoulders, pale grey eyes with the cold, far-reaching quality of winter sky. His golden hair was kept back from his face, and his ceremonial coat was dark with the Iron Veil insignia in silver at the collar, and he wore it the way he wore everything, as though it had been designed specifically for him, which Iveria suspected it had. He had the composure of a man who had never once, in his entire life, walked into a room and wondered whether he belonged there. She noticed something else about him, though. Something she noticed about most people, but which in him was particularly clear in the ceremony light. His eyes moved constantly across the crowd, not the movement of someone who was curious about the people around him or glad to see them there. The movement of someone checking his own reflection in multiple surfaces at once, counting what impression was being made, measuring the room by how it was responding to his presence in it. She noted it and looked away and did not assign it a verdict. She was not in the habit of deciding things about people before she had to. When Oralith called their names, one after the other, which meant the thread had already become visible to her ancient, well-trained eyes, Iveria stepped forward into the circle. The heat of the sacred fire was immediate and warm against her face. She walked toward it and felt, with each step, the golden thread stretch between her and Luthar through the flame. And the feeling of it was not what she had imagined. It was more than she had imagined. Warmer, more certain, more fundamental, like sunlight pressed directly against the center of her chest, not the idea of warmth, but warmth itself, immediate and physical and undeniable, like something that had been true her entire life, waiting patiently for this specific moment to be confirmed out loud. The crowd felt the ripple of it. She heard the held breath around her, the slight, involuntary shifting of hundreds of wolves responding to something real happening in front of them. Old Arvella, near the outer edge of the circle, pressed both hands flat against her heart. Faelora, standing 3 rows back in the crowd, where Iveria could see her from the corner of her eye, went very still. Iveria looked across the sacred fire at Luthar. For 3 seconds, he looked back. Then his expression shut, like a door, closing with the quiet click of a latch settling into place. No slam, no drama, just the simple, controlled finality of a decision being made. His face went smooth, his jaw set. He crossed the circle toward her in slow, deliberate steps, the kind of slowness that is not ease but performance, designed to be seen, each step placed with the awareness of everyone watching it. He stopped 2 feet in front of her. The entire pack went silent. Every wolf in the circle, every old woman with her hand at her heart, every young wolf who had been whispering to the person beside them, silent. I reject the bond. His voice was perfectly level, every syllable placed with precision. But you are not fit to be my Luna. The fire crackled. Nothing else moved. 7 words. 7 words, delivered in front of the entirety of the Iron Veil pack, beside the sacred fire of the highest ceremony they held, under a golden moon, after the goddess herself had just stretched a golden thread between them, through sacred flame, and made the truth of it visible to every wolf in the circle. Iveria did not move. She could not have said afterward what she felt in that exact moment, because it was too large and too strange to carry a single name. It was not quite pain yet. Pain would come later, in the dark of her house, alone, when the shock had settled enough for the full weight to arrive. Right now it was something more immediate. The physical experience of standing upright while the floor disappears beneath your feet. The half-second of freefall before you understand you are falling. He turned away from her before she could speak. He walked, those same deliberate, witnessed steps, to Briastra Silverhowl. Copper-haired, warrior-ranked, with the powerful, decorated posture of someone who had earned everything on her body through years of hard work. She was exactly what the Iron Veil Pack's image required of a Luna, visually striking, accomplished, strong in a way that photographed well. Luthar placed his hand at her waist. He said something quiet to her that no one else could hear. Briastra's expression was notch. It was not gratitude, not surprise, not the warmth of someone who has been chosen for something they wanted. It was the careful, neutral face of someone who has just been handed something heavy and breakable and does not know how to put it down and has not yet found the moment to try. The pack began to murmur, quietly at first, then with the rising, rustling quality of many private conversations beginning at once, all containing approximately the same words. And the golden thread between Iveria and Luthar did not disappear. That was the cruelest part, the detail that Iveria would carry longest. A rejected bond does not dissolve. The ceremony records, the old ones in Orolith's archive room, were specific and plain about this. The bond remains incomplete, untethered, like a fire left burning in an empty room with the door locked from the outside. It does not go out simply because it has been refused. It simply burns, consuming whatever is nearest, slow and patient and relentless. Iveria was nearest. She did not cry. Not yet. She walked herself home through the polished paths of the Iron Veil Pack, past the lit ceremonial torches that had been arranged so beautifully for this night, past the decorative banners that moved in the mild spring wind, and past all the carefully considered beauty of a pack built for being seen. And every single step of the way, every nerve in her body was still ringing from what had happened beside the sacred fire 3 minutes ago. There was space opening around her on the path. She noticed it, the way she noticed everything quietly, completely, without making it into something she expressed. Wolves who had been standing near her during the ceremony were finding reasons to drift elsewhere, or to turn toward other conversations, to become suddenly very interested in something at a slight distance. Not cruelty. Nothing deliberate. Just the instinctive human distance that people put between themselves and something they do not know how to respond to. The silent collective agreement that what had just happened was very awkward for everyone, and perhaps the kindest thing was to not make it more visible by acknowledging it. She walked through all of it and held herself upright, and went home. The house was small and warm. It smelled of dried lavender. Philora had once said it helped with sleep, and Iveria had started keeping it by the window without quite deciding to. She sat on the porch steps in the dark because she did not, in that moment, feel ready to go inside. Inside was closed and familiar, and the familiar felt too small right now for what she was carrying. She sat in the dark and looked at her hands. They were trembling. Not dramatically. A fine, persistent vibration in her fingers that she had not been able to still since the moment Luthar's words landed. She pressed her palms together. The trembling continued. She let her hands rest in her lap and looked at the compound spread below her. The lit torches, the banners, the ceremonial ground where she could still see people gathered, the sacred fire still burning in the distance. She did not know yet that the trembling was biological, or that it was her wolf beginning to feel the drain of a bond left incomplete, the cellular recognition of its counterpart refusing it, beginning the slow inward turn that a healer would have to explain to her in plain terms 3 days later. She did not know yet that it would only get worse. She did not know yet that this specific, terrible night, this exact broken thing, this wound left open to the cold air, was not a wrong turn in the path of her life. It was the path itself, leading exactly where it had always been meant to lead, by a route that no one would have chosen willingly, toward a destination that no one could have predicted from here. She only knew that the golden thread was still there, burning incomplete in her chest, refusing to dissolve. She pressed her hand flat against her sternum and sat in the dark and breathed, very carefully, one breath at a time. 3 days later, Iveria noticed the porch railing. She had walked down those 3 wooden steps every morning for 6 years, and had never in any of those mornings reached for the railing. On the 3rd morning after the ceremony, her hand found it, before she had consciously decided to reach, closing around the worn wood with the automatic certainty of a body that has started making decisions on behalf of someone who is not yet fully paying attention to it. She stopped on the bottom step. She looked at her hand. The trembling was still there, quieter than the first night, but present, a permanent background vibration that sleep hadn't resolved and food hadn't cured. Her chest ached with the low, dull, continuous certainty of something that was not going to stop. It didn't feel like heartbreak, or rather it felt like heartbreak's more practical sibling, less about emotion, more about the body, more like a machinery problem than a grief problem. She released the railing and walked on, or she filed the observation in the same place she filed everything else, the careful internal catalogue she had kept her whole life of things that mattered and would require attention. The pack around her was different, nothing that anyone would admit to if you asked directly. No one was unkind. People still nodded to her in corridors. A few offered the slightly too careful smiles of people trying to communicate that everything was normal by trying a little too hard. But there was a quality to the way most wolves looked at her now, the practiced slight adjustment of the gaze, the subtle rerouting of eye contact to a point slightly past her face, that said, clearly to anyone who knew how to read it, that she was something people did not know how to respond to, and had decided, collectively, and without discussing it, to simply not. She noticed it. She continued walking. She made her way to the healer's quarters and knocked on the door. The Leorissa Ashenfang was not a warm healer. This is not to say she was a cold one. Warmth and cold are not the only 2 options, and Leorissa had always understood this. She was precise. She was practical. She had developed, over 19 years of treating the Iron Veil Pack's physical and psychological wounds, a deep and well-founded allergy to polite untruths. She had watched too many healers soften bad information into something comfortable and unrecognizable, and then watched the patient act on the comfortable version rather than the real one, and she had stopped doing it herself years ago and never gone back. She sat Iveria down at the small wooden table in her quarters, set a cup of something warm in front of her, sat across from her with her hands folded and her eyes direct, the way she always sat when she was about to say something a person needed to hear, and had not yet been told. "The bond is biological," she said. "But when your wolf recognizes its counterpart at the sacred ceremony, the recognition is not just emotional or spiritual. It registers in the body at a cellular level. Your wolf knows its mate. When that recognition is formally refused, the body has nowhere to redirect that energy. It turns inward. Iveria held the warm cup with both hands. It's consuming me. Yes. Silence for a moment. My Iveria absorbed this with the particular stillness of someone who receives difficult information and lets it land completely before responding to it. How fast? That depends on proximity, Lyarissa said. The closer you remain to Alpha Wolf Crest, his territory, his physical presence, the thread that still connects you to him, the faster the deterioration accelerates. Distance slows it, not stops it, slows it. And if I stay? Lyarissa met her eyes. Weeks, not months. What weeks? The word settled between them and didn't move. Iveria was quiet for a long moment. The fire in the corner of the room made a small sound. Outside the window, the compound continued its mourning in complete, ordinary ignorance of what was being said in this room. You said there was something else, Iveria said. Not a guess. She had been reading people her whole life, and she could hear what had not yet been said the same way other people hear what had. Lyarissa looked at her with the expression of a person who has been waiting to see if they would be asked directly, and has decided that if they are, they will answer. I've been watching your symptoms carefully since the ceremony. The pattern of collapse and surge, the way your energy drops and then briefly overcorrects, almost like something trying to compensate, is not standard bond deterioration. Standard deterioration follows a much more linear path. She paused, organizing what she was going to say next. There are old healer texts, very old from before the current pack records, that describe an anomaly in certain rare wolf bloodlines, a suppression pattern, not caused by physical injury, not caused by illness, caused by long-term environmental pressure, by years of existing in a context that continually told the wolf in every small, unspoken way that it was ordinary, that it was less than it was. Iveria looked at her steadily. Does you think something in me has been suppressed? I think, Lyarissa said carefully, that there is something inside you that none of us in this pack have seen in a very long time. Possibly ever, in our lifetimes. She held her gaze. I don't know what it is yet. The old texts are incomplete, but I know it's there. And I know that a broken bond and a forced departure from the context that suppressed it may be the exact combination of circumstances that finally allows it to surface. The fire crackled. The morning outside continued. Iveria sat with this for a long time. Not in the way that people sit with things because they cannot process them, in the way that she processed everything, completely, without rushing, giving information the full weight it deserved before deciding what to do about it. Not then, she said. I need to leave, Lyarissa said. Yes. Philora was waiting at her house when she returned from the healer. 2 mugs of tea, both already made, sitting on the small table on the porch. A folded piece of paper that Philora was holding with the carefully casual posture of someone who has been carrying it around for a day and a half and has practiced not appearing to be doing so. They sat down. They drank their tea in the specific, comfortable silence that can only exist between 2 people who have known each other long enough to have outgrown the need to fill every quiet moment with words. The afternoon light was the particular golden grey of late spring, soft and a little sad. Then Philora put the paper on the table between them. Old pack records, she said, from the Iron Vale archive room. I went in 3 nights ago. She said this without apology or explanation. She had gone into the archive room at night because it was necessary, and she had determined it was necessary, and she did not need to justify that to anyone. Iveria picked up the paper, unfolded it. There is a pack beyond the Ashenfang border. Alpha Arkan Bloodfang. The Night Roar Pack. Felora kept her voice very even, which was the voice she used when she was saying something she thought was important and wanted to give it its proper space. He has a reputation for being hard, as making decisions quickly, having almost no patience for things that waste his time, also for being completely fair. A pause. Also for never turning away unarmed wolves who arrive at his border, requesting an audience. Iveria read the paper twice, set it back down, looked at Felora. Luthar's greatest rival, she said slowly. The paper had that detail too, buried in the second paragraph of old Pack diplomatic records. Felora raised one eyebrow in a way that contained an entire editorial opinion. Is that not just a little bit poetic? And despite everything that was happening inside her chest, the ache, the drain, the complete overturning of every expectation she had carried for 24 years, the corner of Iveria's mouth moved. Not much. Barely. The ghost of a smile, smaller than a real one, but made of the same material. Felora held on to it, the way you hold on to the first warmth after a long, cold season. She packed alone that evening. It did not take long. A worn leather satchel, the one she used for long supply runs, practical and already shaped to her shoulder. 2 changes of clothes, chosen for warmth and durability, to the healer's compounds Lyarissa had pressed into her hands that afternoon with the quiet efficiency of someone whose concern expresses itself in preparation rather than sentiment. Compounds slow the bond deterioration, dosing instructions written in Lyarissa's small, precise handwriting, a separate folded note with the information on which herbs could be sourced in the Ashenfang forest if she ran low before she reached shelter. Or she stood at her window in the dark and looked at the Iron Veil Pack spread below her. The polished paths, the lit torches, the ceremonial banners that were still up from the ceremony 3 nights ago, because someone had not yet gotten around to taking them down. The whole beautiful, carefully arranged world she had been born into and grown up in and belonged to for 24 years. She did not feel nostalgia. Well, nostalgia requires distance, requires that the thing you are looking back at has already receded far enough to become landscape rather than terrain. It would come later, she knew, in the quiet of some future evening, far enough away to look back. Right now, what she felt was something quieter and more specific. The version of herself who had been waiting for recognition, for belonging, for the place she was in to finally look at her the right way, had reached the end of what that waiting could produce. She was not leaving because she had been defeated. She was leaving because she had finally understood, with the particular clarity that devastation sometimes brings, that this was not the place, and that there was only one sensible thing to do when you understand something like that, which is to stop waiting and start walking. She pressed her hand flat against her sternum. The broken thread was there, burning its quiet, relentless burn. She took one slow breath all the way down. Then she went to sleep. She left on a Wednesday morning. Felora was at the gate with nothing in her hands. No tea, no paper, no practical gift for the road. She had brought herself. She put her arms around Iveria and held on for one long, wordless minute, not crying, not making speeches, not doing anything that would make the leaving harder than it already was. Just the full weight of someone who loved her, steady and present for the last time for what would be a while. Then she stepped back. She held Iveria's face in her hands for 1 second, looked at her directly, and let go. Iveria walked through the Iron Veil Gate and did not look back. Not because she didn't love what was behind her, because the only direction that mattered, for right now, was forward. The forest at the edge of Iron Vale territory was old. The specific, delayed kind of old that has its own atmosphere. Not just trees and undergrowth and the ordinary life of a woodland, but something accumulated, the stillness of centuries, a quiet that is not silence, but depth. The pines were tall and grew close, their roots enormous and raised above the earth in places, creating natural steps and shelves that Iveria picked her path through with the attention of someone who had been paying close attention to ground since childhood. At the light between the trees was the grey-green of places that rarely see direct sun, filtered and soft and a little cold. She walked into it and felt the Iron Vale territory behind her start to thin. Not in any dramatic way. There was no line across the ground, no wall, no visible boundary. It was more like a pressure releasing, millimetre by millimetre, the way pressure releases as you rise from deep water toward the surface. The pull of the broken bond in her chest was still there, still constant, still wearing at her with the patient, relentless quality of water working through stone. But with every mile she put between herself and Luthar's territory, it lessened by small, measurable degrees, like cracking a window in a room that had been sealed too long. Not cured, not fixed, just marginally, breathably better. She walked through the first day with her own thoughts as company, which was not a bad situation for someone who had spent a lifetime paying careful attention to things. In the silence of Old Forest, with nothing to do but move and breathe, things surface that the ordinary noise of life keeps submerged. Memories, small details, the texture of the life she was walking away from. She remembered Arvella's laugh, the first time Iveria had said something accidentally funny, and Arvella had produced a full, creaky, delighted laugh. The surprised kind, or from a woman who had been dignified for so long that genuine delight arrived in her face, like a visitor who had not been expected, but was entirely welcome. It had been one of Iveria's favorite moments in years. She remembered a festival night 5 years ago, when the torch fire had reflected in the river below the ceremonial grounds, and for one perfect moment the world had been doubled. Trees and stars and flame, all of it liquid and golden at her feet, moving with the current. She remembered Fialora at 17, making the face she made when she was being entirely morally serious about something, lifting provisions out of the back kitchen stores for a young wolf family who had arrived hungry and too proud to ask for help directly. She did not let herself remember the 3 seconds across the sacred fire. She knew that memory was there, waiting. She could feel its weight at the edge of her thinking, heavy and particular. She put it aside with the careful deliberateness of someone who has learned that not every wound needs to be looked at constantly to be healed. Some things needed time and distance before they could be examined without damage. She would look at it later, when she was far enough away. She slept the first night in a hollow between 2 great roots of a pine tree, old enough to have witnessed things she could not imagine, wrapped in her travel cloak with her bag under her head. She ate the bread Laerissa had packed, dense, practical, the kind of bread made for traveling rather than for pleasure. Her hands were still trembling when she ate. She looked at them in the last light before sleep. These hands she had held steady her whole life, and took a long, slow breath, and closed her eyes. On the second day, the forest changed. She noticed it gradually, across the first hour of walking. The trees taller, the canopy closer and darker, the spaces between trunks narrower. But the quality of the air shifted, acquiring something older and wilder, a territorial weight that had nothing to do with any formal boundary. It was the way a territory feels when you are inside its heart, rather than at its edges. the accumulated presence of wolves who have moved through this land for generations, who have trained here and hunted here and buried their dead here and built their fires here until the land itself holds the shape of them. And she understood she was crossing into Night Raw territory before she could say exactly how she knew. She heard them at the same moment. 3 sets of footsteps descending from the ridge to her right, moving with the deliberate, unhurried precision of people who had been watching for longer than she realized. They knew every stone and root of this approach. They had been watching her from the moment she entered their land. She stopped walking. Her hands went up. And then she said the words she had been quietly rehearsing to herself since somewhere around the middle of the previous day's long walk. The words she had chosen with great care, because she understood with perfect clarity that she would have approximately 30 seconds to make them matter. My name is Iveria. I am unarmed. I am not a threat. I am requesting an audience with Alpha Archon Bloodfang. Heather looked at her from 5 feet away. She looked back at him. She read him quickly, the way she read all people who mattered. And what she found was deliberate, experienced, not cruel, the stillness of someone who makes decisions accurately rather than quickly, and has learned that the two are sometimes different things. She held his gaze and did not look away. He asked if she could walk. She told him she had been walking for 2 days. His expression shifted by a fraction, not quite a smile, just the faint movement of a face that recognized something. Yet he stepped aside. She followed. Nothing about the Night Raw compound was designed to impress. This was the first thing Iveria registered, and she registered it with deep, immediate appreciation, the specific relief of someone who has spent their whole life in a place built for impression and is encountering, for the first time, a place built for something else entirely. The buildings were dark timber, were low and solid, and constructed with the single-minded practicality of structures meant to survive hard weather and hard use. The training grounds were enormous, large enough for the full pack to operate simultaneously, and the ground of them was worn flat by generations of boots in the particular compacted, solid way that comes from real use over real time, not maintenance. There were no decorative banners, no arranged paths, no architectural detail designed to communicate importance to anyone who arrived. It looked like a place that had endured things, that had survived things, that had been tested repeatedly, and had not come out the other side pretty, but had come out intact. She respected it before she had spoken to a single wolf who lived there. Heather brought her through the gate and through the wide main corridor, and whatever reserves she had been running on for the last 2 days were giving out now in the specific, unglamorous way that reserves give out. Not dramatically, but measurably in the slight heaviness of her legs and the way the edges of the corridor tilted fractionally if she looked at them too long. She straightened her shoulders. She kept walking. Archon Bloodfang was standing at the far end of the great hall. He was taller than she had been somehow expecting, which was strange because she had not been expecting any particular height. She had not let herself build a picture of him. She had kept her thinking about him deliberately practical, a man with a fair reputation and a territorial rivalry with the king who had rejected her. That was what she needed him to be, a calculated destination, not a person yet. He made it difficult to maintain that the moment she saw him, not because of anything performed or dramatic about how he stood. The opposite. He stood with the complete absence of performance. Dark-haired, broad through the shoulders, a simple leather jacket with no insignia anywhere on it, which in a world of alpha insignia was itself a statement, though not an intentional one. His eyes were deep amber, the color of firelight that had been burning long enough to reach its fullest warmth, completely steady, without any flicker. He looked at her the way someone looks at a map they are trying to understand, not to judge, not to evaluate against a standard, but to genuinely read, to know what was actually there. He asked her 2 questions. "What is your name?" And then, when she had answered, "Who did this to you?" She told him the whole thing. She did not soften it or arrange it into something easier to hear. She had come too far and used up too much to have anything left for softening. Alpha King Luthar Wolfcrest, was the sacred flame ceremony, the rejection in front of the entire Iron Veil pack, the incomplete bond and what Larissa had told her it was doing to her body, the timeline, the reason she had walked 2 days through Old Forest and arrived at a stranger's border at midnight with her hands raised. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Not the hesitation of someone deciding what to say, but the stillness of someone who has already decided and is choosing the precise right words. He turned to Hava. "Bring her inside. She stays." 3 words. No ceremony attached to them. No announcement, no speech, no performance of generosity for the benefit of anyone watching. Just a decision, made, stated in the minimum number of words it required. Something moved in Iveria then, deep inside her, beneath the broken thread and the exhaustion and the 2 days of cold walking. Her wolf, the one that had been draining steadily since the ceremony, that had been thinning like a candle burning in a room with no air, made a sound that had nothing of the broken bond in it, entirely separate from it, entirely its own, something she did not have a name for yet. She filed it carefully in the part of herself reserved for things to think about later, when she was not barely standing. Hava put a hand under her elbow. Carefully, did with the particular gentleness of a very large person who has learned to calibrate their strength for situations that require less of it, and walked her through the door. She let him. She slept for 14 hours, the deep, uninterrupted kind, the kind that the body claims for itself when it has reached the limit of what it can continue doing while conscious. She did not dream, or if she did, the dreams did not reach the surface. She woke to grey morning light coming through the timber-framed window and the complete, momentary disorientation of not knowing where she was. And then the smell of the room reached her, cedar and old wood and something clean, and the sounds of the compound outside drifted in, and she remembered. She was at night roar. She was still alive. The broken thread ached in her chest, but it was quieter, measurably, genuinely quieter. The distance was doing what Larissa had promised. Someone had left a tray of food on the table beside the door. Not an elaborate tray, a practical one. Bread and hard cheese and dried fruit, and a small pot of something that turned out to be a mild herbal tea when she poured it. She sat on the edge of the bed and ate all of it, looking out the window at the wide training ground below, where the night roar wolves were already running morning drills in the grey early light, and she felt something she had not felt in 6 days. She felt like a person who might, eventually, be all right. Not today. Not yet. The thread still ached. The trembling in her hands had not fully resolved. Her body was still running on the edge of what it could manage. But eventually was more than she had been able to see from Iron Veil, and it was enough to work with. The night roar wolves were different from what she had expected, in a way she found she could not immediately articulate. It took a few days of moving through the compound, carefully at first, measuring the space, reading the dynamics, before she found the word for it. Directness. They were direct. Not unkind. In fact, many of them were warm, in the practical, unsentimental way of people who express warmth through action rather than performance. But they did not arrange their faces around her. They did not look carefully away from her or past her, or give her the cautious, slightly sideways glances of people managing a complicated social situation involving her. They looked at her, nodded, and continued with their day. They made space at meals without making it into a thing. If they were curious about why she was there, they kept that curiosity to themselves and did not inflict it on her. She had not realized how much energy she had been spending in Iron Vale on the awareness of being observed, being managed, as being carefully handled by a community that did not know what to do with her and was being polite about not knowing. At Night Raw, she simply existed. The relief of it was more physical than she had expected. On the 8th morning, Arkan sat down across from her at the long dining table while she was still finishing her meal. He had a cup of something dark and moved the way he did everything, without announcing it, without any quality of requesting permission or making an entrance, or he simply arrived at the table and sat down. "You're looking better," he said. She considered this for a brief moment. "Marginally," she said. He repeated the word with the flat, precise quality of someone testing it. Marginally. A pause. "Glass half empty?" "Glass accurately assessed," she said. The smile, when it came, changed his whole face. It arrived quietly, without warning. Not the polished, considered expression he wore in public spaces, but something underneath that, something more immediate. He looked, for one moment, like a person who had just been caught by surprise in a way he did not mind in the slightest. "When you're ready," he said, "I want to know what you can do. We don't take people in and keep them comfortable indefinitely. That isn't what this place is for. But I'm not in a hurry. Take the time you need." He said this without apology. Not cold, not a threat, or just the plain, direct truth of how this place operated. And then he stood and picked up his cup and left. She sat at the table alone for a while afterward, looking at the door he had gone through, and she thought about the fact that this was the first conversation in 8 days in which she had not felt, at any point, like a problem someone was trying to carefully manage. It was an unexpectedly large thing to feel about a conversation that had lasted 3 minutes. Gwindra Darkclaw found her on the training ground on the 11th morning. Iveria had been watching the senior warriors' drills from the far edge of the ground, standing at the fence with her arms crossed, and the kind of focused attention she gave to things she was trying to understand, not passively, not as a spectator, but with the specific quality of someone memorizing how something works so they can use that knowledge later. Gwindra crossed the ground toward her with the economy of movement that was simply how she existed, compact, deliberate, nothing wasted. She was not much taller than Iveria, but carried herself in a way that made questions of height irrelevant. Close-cropped hair, a training scar on her jaw that had long since become part of the architecture of her face. The eyes of someone who had been paying very careful attention to the world for 40 years and had formed strong, or accurate opinions about most of it. She stopped beside Iveria at the fence and looked at her for a moment. Then, "Come on then." 23 training sessions across the following weeks. 3 mornings at first, then more. Gwindra set the schedule without asking what Iveria preferred, and Iveria showed up for all of it without being asked twice, which established something between them before either of them had decided what to call it. Iveria was not who she had thought she was, physically, but this was the discovery that kept arriving across those early sessions, the repeated, slightly startling experience of her body doing something she had not known it could do. She ran faster than she expected. She held positions in sparring significantly longer than wolves who had trained at Night Roar for years. She saw the tactical logic of a movement, where to step, how to angle, what the next two exchanges would look like, before her body had fully executed the first one, at which meant she was perpetually slightly ahead of where her training history suggested she should be. Gwindra noticed this. She said nothing about it directly, which was itself a communication. She simply adjusted the sessions, adding more, going harder, calibrating to what was actually there, rather than what she might have expected, based on the story she had been told about where this wolf came from. 12 days in, nor during a hold exercise that Iveria had maintained for considerably longer than anyone had expected, Gwindra stopped her mid-movement with a single word. Stop. She stepped around her, looking at her form with the attention of someone reading a text. Your left side, every reach, you extend and then you pull back, half an inch, every time. Why? Old injury, Iveria said. She was breathing hard. Healed? She had to think about this. She had been protecting that side for so long, it had become something her body did without instruction. Yes. Then stop protecting it. Your body thinks the injury is still there. It isn't. You are training yourself against a wound that has already healed, and it is costing you half your reach every time you extend. Gwindra's voice was even, not unkind, not impatient, just precise. Your body is running on the wrong information. Oh, change the information. She did not mean only the physical injury. They both understood this without either of them saying so. It was not the kind of thing you said out loud in a training session, but it sat in the space between them for the rest of the morning and for several days afterward. What changed around the 11th session was subtle and then not. She stopped in the middle of a sparring sequence, being aware of Luthar's 7 words, but they had been there in the back of every movement for weeks, the specific, particular weight of being told you were not enough by the one person in front of an entire pack who could make it loudest. And then one morning, they simply were not. Not because she had resolved them, not because she had found some internal counter-argument. She had just run out of room for them. Her body was too busy discovering what it was actually capable of to keep holding those words in the foreground. One evening, while sitting on the fence at the edge of the training ground with water flasks between them and the late light turning the packed earth golden, Gwindra said, looking at the fence line, not at Iveria, the way she said the most important things. You are not weak. You have just never been in a place that believed in you long enough for you to work out what you were. Iveria was quiet for a moment. The light moved. Somewhere across the compound, the dinner bell would ring in a few minutes. Or I'm beginning to work it out, she said. Gwindra took a long drink from her flask. Good, she said. Jorvan Frostclaw was the Night Roar Pack's strategist, which meant he spent most of his time in the map room and emerged occasionally for meals, and very occasionally for sleep. He was tall and angular, what with reading glasses that lived perpetually on the very end of his nose, in a way that suggested they were staged there by a person who had simply stopped caring what they looked like while they were working. He had a habit of thinking out loud, complete thoughts, half-formed ones, questions he was asking himself as much as anyone else, regardless of whether any listener was keeping up. He was also, when situations arose that called for it, unexpectedly dry in the way that very intelligent people are sometimes funny, by accident, with perfect timing, without any apparent awareness that it was happening. Iveria had gone to him initially with a single question. She had overheard a discussion at dinner about the territorial agreement between Night Roar and the Ridgeline Pack to the north, and something in the structure of the agreement had seemed to her, from what little she'd heard to be more interesting than the dinner conversation had treated it. She wanted to understand why. She asked. He answered. He pointed at something else while answering, which raised another question, which she asked. 2 hours later, neither of them had moved from the map room, and the dinner table had long since been cleared. It became a daily thing, without any formal decision being made about it, or sessions of 2 to 3 hours. Territorial maps spread across the long central table, alliance structures explained and then examined, not just what they were, but why they had formed, what pressures had created them, which ones were stable, and which ones were held together by habit rather than genuine interest. Regional power dynamics, trading routes, to the history of territorial disputes that explained things about current relationships that the current relationships could not explain on their own. On the fourth day, Jorven unrolled the largest map he kept, the full regional one, covering the territory from the northern mountain packs all the way to the coastal wolves, and laid it flat across the table. He was talking while he did it. Some thought about the ridgeline agreement that he was finishing, and he did not watch her look at the map. She was quiet for 30 seconds. Night Roar sits at the center of every major crossroads in the region, she said. Every significant alliance route, every trade corridor. They all pass within a day's travel of this compound. Any pack that controls Night Roar's position controls the movement of the entire region. Jorven stopped talking. He looked at her over his glasses. He pushed them up his nose. Most people, he said, with the very measured tone of someone choosing their words deliberately, look at that map for considerably longer before they see that. How long did you look at it? A pause. I didn't say, he replied, which was not an answer, and both of them were fully aware of this. She laughed. Not the small, careful, social laugh she had been producing in difficult social situations her whole life, but the real kind, easy and genuine, arriving without her having to reach for it. She had not realized how far away laughter had felt until it came back this easily, this simply, as over an unanswered question in a map room with a strategist who had apparently been looking at a map for an undisclosed length of time. The small library off the main hall had been used seriously for a long time. You could tell by how it smelled. Old paper and cedar smoke, and something else, underneath both of those that was the smell of accumulated work, of problems thought through in this room, as of knowledge moved from one mind to another, through the medium of written pages in this particular space. It was Iveria's favorite room in the compound. She had been in it most evenings in the 5th week, working through healer texts that Leorissa had referenced in a letter. Information about bond deterioration, about recovery timelines, about what the body did after the worst of a rejection had been survived. The broken thread in her chest had been quieter for 2 weeks now, measurably quieter. She was eating full meals. The trembling in her hands had resolved. She was not fully healed. She understood this and did not overestimate her recovery. But she was not in danger anymore. Distance had done what distance was supposed to do. On a particular evening in the 5th week, Arkan was in the library when she arrived. He was at the far end of the long table, working through a stack of territorial correspondence with the focused, a quiet efficiency that was simply how he did most things. He looked up when she came in, acknowledged her with a nod, and looked back at his papers. She settled at her end of the table with her healer texts. The fire was low. The room settled into a comfortable working silence. They had been in the same room for nearly an hour when she asked the question. "Why did you let me stay?" He looked up. He considered the question, not as though it surprised him, more as though he was choosing which answer was the true one. "You raised your hands," he said. "You were barely standing. You were in torn ceremonial clothes at a stranger's border at midnight. Most people in that condition panic or collapse or do something reactive. You raised your hands and announced yourself clearly and told me exactly what you needed and why. He turned a page. That is thinking clearly under extreme pressure. It is not a common thing. She was quiet for a moment. So you kept me because you thought I would be useful. He looked at her directly. I kept you because you deserved a chance. Those are not the same thing, and they are also not mutually exclusive. The fire shifted. Somewhere outside, the compound had gone quiet for the night. Something changed in the quality of the room, not sudden, not announced. The way temperature changes when a season is turning, without a single identifiable moment, and yet unmistakable once you notice it. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. Just that. His hand, large and warm, over both of hers where they rested on the open text. She looked at his hand. Then she looked at his face. The amber eyes, steady as firelight in still air. The absolute quality of his attention when he gave it, no part of him somewhere else, no fraction of his focus divided. All of it here, all of it for her. She did not move away. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. The fire burned down a little further. Outside, the moon rose without ceremony over the night-raw compound, and neither of them inside the small library paid it any attention. It happened in the 6th week, a sparring session with Gwindra, a rotation drill they had been working on for 2 weeks, one that required full commitment of the whole body, no protection instincts, no half measures. Iveria was mid-movement, deeply in it, but completely focused on the physical logic of what she was doing, and then something changed, not from the outside. From inside, deep inside, below anything she could have named or located, like something that had been pressed completely flat for a very long time, pressed so flat and for so long that it had stopped feeling like pressure and had started feeling like the normal shape of things. Suddenly, in this moment of full physical commitment, straightening, her eyes changed color mid-movement. She did not know this until she saw Gwindra's face. Gwindra went completely still. Not the stillness of shock, the controlled, alert stillness of a warrior who has just encountered something she recognizes as requiring precision. She dropped into a wide, grounded stance and said, with a steadiness that Iveria would think about later, "Stop. Do not shift. Hold exactly where you are." Her voice carried something in it that it hadn't carried in 23 sessions. Not fear. The careful, controlled recognition of someone who knows what they are looking at and knows that how they respond in the next 30 seconds matters. Orelith was at the training ground within the hour. 40 years of keeping records and witnessing things had given Orelith's face a particular quality of composure. Not cold, but contained. The expression of someone who has learned to receive extraordinary information without their face, doing something that interferes with the information continuing to arrive. She asked Iveria to try to shift, fully, if she could manage it. Iveria tried. She had shifted before. Every wolf could. But this was not the shift she had always known, her ordinary form, familiar and fully mapped. Something else was pressing through from behind it. Vast, ancient, gold and silver, not as colors but as qualities. Light in the way that things are light when they generate it rather than reflect it. Wind touched, as though the air near her was moving differently than the surrounding air, responding to something it recognized. Four-legged and enormous and patient, with the patience of something that has been waiting for 4 generations to be given room. She shifted back before it completed. She was breathing very hard. Every nerve ending was ringing. She straightened, one vertebra at a time, and looked at Orolith. Orolith was quiet. She stood in the center of the packed training ground with her hands at her sides and an expression that Iveria had never seen on her face before, and was quite certain she had never seen on any face in quite this form. 40 years of witnessing things. 40 years of careful, composed record-keeping. What was on Orolith's face now was awe, the storm shift bloodline. Very quietly, and as though she was saying it to the air as much as to anyone. Then to Iveria, with the full weight of her attention. Do you know what that name means? She did not. Orolith told her. In the oldest records, the volumes that required gloves, or that Orolith kept in the deepest part of the archive room in a climate-controlled cabinet that she had built herself because no one else was going to. There were accounts of wolves who carried a lineage so rare that it had been documented only 14 times in the complete written history of the Pack territories. A bloodline that carried extraordinary power, extraordinary perception, a connection to the bond between wolf and moon that went deeper than anything ordinary wolves experienced. It was thought to have gone extinct. The last confirmed storm-shift wolf in the records had lived 4 generations ago, and the records noted no descendants. It was never extinct, Orolith said. Her voice was steady. Her eyes were not. It was suppressed by long-term emotional and environmental damage, by decades of being inside a context that consistently communicated, in all the small and indirect ways that contexts communicate things, that you were ordinary, that you were not worth examining closely, that you did not contain anything worth looking at too hard. She looked at Iveria with the full specific weight of 40 years of paying attention to the truth. Your power was never absent. It was buried under the weight of being constantly underestimated. And the rejection, the broken bond, the walking away from the territory and the person who had suppressed you is exactly what the moon goddess needed to happen for the burial to end. The training ground was silent around them. No one else had moved or spoken since Iveria's eyes had changed color mid-drill. The night-roar wolves nearest them had simply stopped what they were doing and were standing at a respectful distance, and their faces had the same quality that Orolith's had, and each in its own way. She bonded you to Luthar Wolfcrest because she knew what he would do, Orolith said. Not to wound you, to move you. The wound was not a mistake in the plan. It was the plan. That night, Arkan came to find her alone on the training ground. He did not speak immediately. He simply stood beside her, in the same way he had sat beside her in the library, present without requiring anything, steady in the way of something that has decided where it is going to stand and is not going to be moved by anything less than a direct request to move. After a long moment, he said, "I knew something was there from the first night. I did not know what it was. I only knew it was worth waiting for." She looked at him. The amber of his eyes in the dark of the training ground, the absolute steadiness of everything about him. "You waited," she said. "I'm patient," he said. "When something matters." She looked back at the mountains on the eastern horizon. Do you know what she said? Orolith. She said the moon bonded me to Luthar because she knew what he would do. That the wound was the plan. He was quiet beside her for a moment. Do you believe that? She thought about this. About 2 days of walking through pine forest. About Leorissa's voice in the healer's quarters, plain and precise. About Fealora handing her a folded piece of paper. What about 3 words in a great hall? Bring her inside. About 23 training sessions and a map room and a library with a low fire and a hand placed over hers without a word of explanation. Yes, she said. I think I do. The messenger arrived on a Tuesday morning, which is the kind of detail that you remember later. How ordinary the arrival of extraordinary news always seems when it first shows up. Not announced. Not dramatic. Just a young wolf at the gate on a Tuesday morning with a sealed letter and a slightly apologetic expression. Darnock was 20-something, honest-faced, with the specific combination of qualities that made him an unusual person to work for someone like Luthar Wolfcrest. He could read a situation accurately, and he could not pretend things were fine when they were not. These were not, as it turned out, qualities that served an image-conscious Alpha particularly well. But they made him a very good messenger, in that he delivered difficult information without the surrounding commentary that made it worse. He handed the sealed letter to Havor without elaboration. The iron veil insignia was pressed in black wax on the fold. Havor looked at it for a moment with the expression of someone who has just received a confirmation of a thing they already suspected. He brought it to the receiving room. Arkan read the letter once. He set it down. His expression did not change in any way that was visible. Call the senior counsel. The Iron Veil Pack's formal challenge claim was 3 pages long. Jorvan read it once at the council table, then set it down and removed his glasses and cleaned them, which was the version of a significant reaction that he permitted himself in official settings. Havor stood at the wall with his arms crossed and his face doing nothing. 2 senior wolves were present across from Arkan, who had not moved from his chair. The territorial claim itself was, as Jorvan put it, with the specific precision of a man who has read many documents and knows exactly how much confidence each phrase merits, essentially transparent. Luthar was claiming Iveria as a ward of the Iron Veil Pack, taken into rival territory without Alpha knowledge or consent. A reading of territorial law that required several conditions to be applied in a very particular way, to most of which conditions did not cleanly apply to Iveria's situation, and at least one of which required ignoring a competing provision in the same legal text. What was not transparent was the attached formal invocation of the ancient Alpha trial of sovereign claim. An Alpha trial of this kind, witnessed by representatives from every major territory in the region, as the outcome binding across all attending packs, could not be refused by a pack acting in good faith without the refusal itself becoming evidence of wrongdoing. Luthar had constructed the claim specifically to force acceptance of the trial, and it had worked. The claim is weak, Jorvan said. The trial is real. What does refusal look like? Havor asked. It looks like we're holding her against her will, Jorvan said, which is not something we can afford, legally or otherwise, or in front of 7 territories. Arkan looked at the letter on the table. One more moment of silence. Then, we prepare. The meeting was over. Arkan brought her to the receiving room and set the letter on the table and let her read it herself. He stood at the window while she did. She read it once, then again. She set it down and looked at the table for a moment. Then, he doesn't want me back. Not bitterness, not wounded feeling. The flat, accurate statement of a person who has just read a document and understood what it actually says beneath what it appears to say. He rejected a fated mate publicly at the highest sacred ceremony his pack holds, in front of everyone. And now that mate is alive and visible in his greatest rival's compound, and from what anyone can observe from the outside, she looks considerably stronger than she looked 6 weeks ago under his roof. She looked up. He cannot control that story from a distance. The challenge is not about me as a person. It is about a narrative that is moving in a direction he didn't choose. Arkan looked at her from the window. His expression was not surprise. "I need access to the law archives," she said. "Jorven will take you." She found what she was looking for on the third day. Jorven laid it in front of her on the table without commentary, simply opened the oldest territorial law charter they held, the one that required gloves, or to the relevant page, and placed it in front of her and stepped back. She read it 3 times. A claimed mate of recognized rare bloodline may exercise independent choice inside an Alpha trial circle. She looked up. Jorven was at the window with great apparent interest in something outside. She looked back at the text. She did not tell Arkan. 7 days between the letter and the trial. Training with Gwindra shifted in quality, not harder in volume, sharper in purpose. More each session had the focused, specific quality of preparation for something particular, though neither of them named what that particular thing was. Gwindra taught her several things she hadn't taught her before: how to move in enclosed space, how to manage stamina across an extended period of sustained effort rather than sharp bursts, how to read the rhythm of an opponent who is tiring and calibrate your own reserves accordingly. Iveria showed up for all of it. She pushed herself without having to be pushed. Sessions with Oralith in the archive room, the storm shift lineage in full, the 14 recorded instances, what each one had done, what the historical records described of its appearance and its power, and the effect its presence had had on the wolves who witnessed it. Each record slightly different, each one confirming the same core truth, that this bloodline had never been ordinary, and that the wolves who had carried it had changed the world around them. Reading these accounts, Iveria felt something she had not felt in a very long time, and perhaps had never felt with this particular quality. Not pride. Something more basic than pride. The recognition of something true, of a description that fit. She had been waiting to fit somewhere her whole life. She had not known that the somewhere had been inside her all along. On the third night before the trial, Arkan found her in the map room. Late, the compound mostly asleep, the fire low, the regional map spread in front of her, though she was not, at that particular moment, looking at it. He sat across from her. He did not ask what she was thinking, or fill the quiet with anything. After a while, she said, "Tell me something true about yourself. The kind of thing people don't usually ask for." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "My father believed that leading was weight, not glory. That every wolf you are responsible for is a pound on your back, and you had better be strong enough to carry them, because if you fall, they fall." A pause. He was not an easy man. He was a right one. She looked at him across the map. "That's why you let me stay. Not just because I raised my hands. You saw someone with no safe place, and you could not walk past that." He met her gaze. "I'm not cold. I just don't explain my reasons unless someone asks clearly." "I am not most people," she said. "No," he said. "You're not." On the night before the trial, he found her at the compound wall, looking east toward the mountains she had crossed 6 weeks ago. He stood beside her. The night was cold and clear. After a long time, he reached up and brushed a strand of her hair back from her face, carefully, as though the gesture had been considered and decided on, and was exactly what he had intended. "When this is done," he said, "I want to mark you." "Properly, what if that is something you want?" Her wolf answered before she organized a response, clean and warm and completely certain, with none of the broken bonds quality in it, nothing borrowed or desperate, something entirely its own. She said, "Ask me again after you win." He said, "After we win." She looked at him. She thought about asking what he meant. She did not, because she already knew. And she thought that they both knew that she knew, and that neither of them needed to say it. She sat in her room with the charter text she had memorized, the exact provision, the exact conditions, every word of it in the oldest legal language the Pack territories used, which she had spent 2 days learning to read with sufficient precision to be absolutely certain she understood it correctly. She was very clear with herself in the quiet of the night before about what this was and what it was not. She was not planning to rescue him, but that was not the nature of it, and she did not want it to be. She was not going to walk into a trial circle and claim standing because she was afraid he might lose and felt she had to save him. She believed in him, in the steadiness and strength and experience she had watched for 6 weeks, and she was not approaching this as a rescue. She was approaching it as what it actually was, a recognition that she was a participant in this story, not a prize being contested by 2 alphas, a wolf with legal standing, with a rare bloodline now documented and recognized, with a right written into the oldest charter the Pack territories held. The fight was happening because of her. Her standing to be present inside it was written in law. She was going to use it. She put her hand flat against her sternum. The broken thread, the incomplete golden bond from the sacred fire 6 weeks ago, was the quietest it had ever been. Almost gone. Not gone, she could still feel it, faintly, like the way you can still feel a scar long after the wound has closed, but quiet enough that it was no longer the loudest thing in her chest. The loudest thing in her chest now was something clean and warm and absolutely her own. She closed her eyes. She breathed. She was ready. Under a dark moon, in a wide valley at the junction of 3 Pack borders, the wolves of 7 territories gathered before dawn. The torches at the circle's edge had been planted at dusk, long iron stakes driven deep into the ground, the flame at the top of each one burning straight and steady in the still air. The circle itself was marked with old chalk and older tradition, the boundary visible in the torchlight as a pale line in the dark earth. The valley was large enough to hold several hundred wolves with room between them, and it was filling steadily as the hours before dawn passed. This was not the kind of gathering that happened often. An alpha trial of sovereign claim, witnessed, binding, invoked formally, and accepted formally, had not occurred in this region in living memory. Every territory had sent representatives, elders who had traveled days, warriors who had come to witness history with their own eyes and carry the account of it back to their packs. Healers who were present because trials of this kind sometimes required them, or the specific low murmur of a large crowd that understands it is about to see something it will spend the rest of its life describing. Iveria stood with the Night Roar group near the eastern edge of the crowd. She wore what she wore every morning on the training ground. Dark, practical clothes, nothing borrowed or ceremonial. She had arrived with her hands in her pockets and her chin level. She watched the circle and she breathed. Luthar arrived with 20 Iron Veil warriors. He was exactly as he always was, tall, composed, wearing a dark coat that managed to be both ceremonial and practical, his pale grey eyes moving across the crowd with the quality she had noticed that first night at the sacred fire, counting reflections. He walked to the center of the witness ground like a man arriving at his own event, which in his understanding of the situation she knew. He probably was. Briastra walked beside him in training armor, copper hair pinned back, face composed. She found Iveria in the crowd and looked at her for one long, silent moment. Not hostility, not challenge. Exhaustion, mostly. The specific exhaustion of someone who has been playing a role they didn't want for 6 weeks and has not yet found a door marked exit. Arkan did not scan the crowd when the Night Roar group arrived. He walked to the center of the circle and stood there with his arms at his sides, and the absolute quality of his stillness, the complete or settled absence of performance, was itself a kind of statement that could be heard from any distance. Pearl of the Ridgeline pack was 70 years old, white-haired, and built like someone who had been solid at birth and had simply continued in that direction. 35 years of territorial law. No patience for anything that wasted the circle's time. Infinite patience for everything that was legitimate inside it. She read the terms of the trial to the assembled witnesses in the direct or unhurried voice of someone who has long since stopped needing to perform authority, because actual authority sounds nothing like performance. The circle was sealed. The law was ancient and in force. What happened inside it tonight was binding across all 7 territories, without exception. Iveria listened to every word. She already had the provision memorized. She was listening for the moment she would need it. Luthar was faster. This was apparent within the first 60 seconds, and the crowd adjusted its breath accordingly, a slight collective shift, a rebalancing of expectations. His footwork was precise and clearly trained for exactly this kind of combat, his movement economy exact, his strikes targeted to the points that would build damage over time. He was very good. It was important to be clear about this. He was a skilled fighter, and he wanted this very badly, and both of those things were visible in every exchange. Arkan had greater stamina. He had been inside real situations more often. There is a particular quality to a fighter who is trained for combat, and a different quality to a fighter who has been genuinely inside it. The kind where there is no controlled session, no set of rules that pauses everything when someone gets hurt. The kind that requires decisions in the fraction of time between breaths where nothing is available except what you actually are. Arkan absorbed the opening exchanges and adjusted. He did not win them. Luthar was landing. The cut above Arkan's left eye appearing at the 3rd exchange, his shoulder working harder than it should by the 8th. But he was not losing ground in ways that mattered. He was reading. He was waiting for what the length of the fight would reveal. 10 minutes passed. 20. The crowd that had come with expectations of a clear, fast result fell quiet as the complexity of the fight became apparent. 30 minutes. The crowd had stopped watching a contest and started witnessing something genuine. 2 exhausted wolves making decisions under conditions that removed everything except what they were made of. Luthar's composure was thinning at the edges. Not breaking. Thinning. The practiced quality of his expression was giving way to something raw underneath. At 38 minutes, he drove Arkan back hard. 3 steps, 6, Arkan's heel finding the chalk line of the circle's edge. Luthar moved in. Iveria stepped into the circle. Every warrior on both sides moved simultaneously. The crowd erupted in sound. A dozen hands went to weapons. Someone shouted something that was swallowed in the general noise. Pearl's voice cut across everything. Not loud, penetrating. The specific voice of someone who has never in their life needed volume to be obeyed. Hold. They held. Barely. The circle went silent. Luthar looked across at Iveria. The crack in his composure spread. Was this is against tradition? Read the charter, Alpha King. Pearl was already holding the relevant page. She had found it in advance, Iveria noticed. She had done her research. She has standing, complete silence. Iveria looked at Luthar across the space of the circle. She had looked at him one other time across a space that mattered, across a sacred fire, 6 weeks and a lifetime ago, for 3 seconds before the door shut. She looked at him now with a different quality than she had looked at him then. Not grief, not anger. Something much quieter. Clarity. She had never been the problem. She took one slow breath, and she shifted. It did not arrive gradually. It arrived the way a tide arrives when the shore has been waiting too long. All at once, inevitable, without hesitation, 4 generations of absence becoming presence in a single moment that could not be reversed or mistaken. Gold and silver, not as colors, as qualities. Light in the way that things are light when they generate it, rather than simply reflect it. The torches at the circle's edge reached toward her, rather than away from her, as though light recognized what it was in the presence of and responded. The air around her moved differently. The ground beneath her, the packed old earth of a neutral valley at the junction of 3 borders, seemed, in some quality that defied simple description, to receive her weight with the particular recognition of something that has been waiting. She was vast, ancient in the specific way that rare things are ancient, not old, but deep, carrying the accumulated weight of all the generations in which this form had been compressed and suppressed and buried, and now was not. 4-legged, wind-touched, gold and silver and enormous and absolutely, completely, undeniably present. The circle went silent, or not the held-breath silence from earlier in the fight. Something much older than that. Something that arrives when a large number of people simultaneously encounter something they did not believe they would see in their lifetimes, and have not prepared words for, and have nothing to do except be quiet in the face of it. The oldest witnesses were crying, not from sadness, but from the specific involuntary response that arrives when something true that you had long since stopped believing in is suddenly confirmed in front of your eyes. The torches reached toward her, nature, recognizing something it had missed for 100 years. She shifted back. The wolf form released, and she stood in the circle again, on 2 legs, breathing hard, every nerve ending ringing from what had just passed through her. She straightened. She lifted her chin. She waited until her breath had steadied enough for her voice to be what she needed it to be. I am Iveria, of the Iron Veil Pack. Clear, steady, carrying across the silent valley to the witnesses of all 7 territories. The moon goddess placed a bond between me and Alpha King Luthar Wolfcrest at the sacred flame ceremony. He refused it. She let that sit in the air for one complete breath. 7 territories heard it. 7 territories worth of witnesses understood exactly what she was saying and why it mattered. I am exercising independent claim, as the law permits. I choose Alpha Archon Bloodfang of the Night Roar Pack as my mate and my alpha. She turned to face Archon. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not in 6 weeks of meals and training ground observations and library evenings and late-night conversations by low firelight. Not surprise, but something more fundamental. Recognition. The look of a person seeing a thing confirmed that they have known to be true, with the last remaining uncertainty removed. He crossed the circle toward her. Not running, not hurrying in any way that suggested urgency, because there was no urgency. Everything had already been decided. He moved toward her, the way someone moves toward something that belongs to them and has found its way home. Unhurried, because unhurried was the right pace for this moment. He stopped in front of her. he asked very quietly, only for her, only in the space between them where no one else's ears could reach. "Is this truly what you want?" She looked at him, his amber eyes, steady as they had been in the great hall 6 weeks ago, when he had made a decision without explanation and said 3 words, and they had been the most solid thing anyone had said to her in 6 weeks. "I told you to ask me after you won," she said. "After we won," he said. He marked her, and of the incomplete bond snapped clean. Not with pain, not with the violence she had sometimes, in the darkest hours of the second week, feared it might use when it finally ended. With relief. The specific, profound, physical relief of a door opening into a room that was built specifically for the person entering it, where the ceiling is exactly the right height, and the air is exactly the right temperature, and every dimension fits in the particular way that makes you understand, that without anyone saying so, that this is where you were supposed to be. The broken thread dissolved. 6 weeks of it. 6 weeks of the low, relentless drain. The pulling in her chest that had woken her at the ceremony and had not fully stopped since. The incomplete thing that had driven her from her home and across 2 days of cold forest and to the edge of a stranger's border at midnight. Gone. Not gradually. All at once. Clean. The roar from the witnesses of 7 territories rose around them. Not from one side. Not from the Night Roar group or the Iron Veil group or the watching representatives of the other 5 packs. From all of it. All 7. The whole valley. The whole assembled witness ground in the involuntary collective sound that very large groups of people make when they have just seen something that removes all remaining ambiguity about what they believed was true. Archon did not move from where he stood. He put his arms around her. Quietly, without announcement, arg in front of the roaring valley, as though the valley were simply not the relevant thing in this particular moment. She leaned into him with the full weight of someone who has been carrying everything alone for a very long time, and has finally found someone who is going to stand beside it with her. The moon hung dark above the valley. The torches burned steady, or the witnesses of 7 territories would carry this account for the rest of their lives and tell it to everyone who asked, and some who hadn't. Iveria pressed her face briefly against Archon's shoulder and breathed. They had won. Luthar Wolfcrest returned to Iron Veil territory before dawn. He rode home under a dark moon with 20 warriors who did not speak, because there is nothing useful to say in the hours after. A man has watched the story he was trying to control walk away from him in a direction he didn't choose, witnessed by 7 territories in a circle that bound the outcome across all of them. He spent a long night in his study looking at the wall. Not at any particular thing on the wall. Just the wall. The flat, plain surface of something that was not showing him anything. There is a specific kind of reckoning that comes to a person who has made a very public error and watched all of its consequences arrange themselves clearly in front of them at once. It is not pleasant. It does not have a quick resolution. It requires the person to sit with the full weight of what they chose and what it produced, without the defense of any alternative explanation, without anyone in the room to help them reframe it. Whether Luthar Wolfcrest found that reckoning useful, whether he sat with it long enough for it to change something in him, the story does not resolve. History is patient about these things. It does not need every ending to be a transformation. Sometimes a person simply lives with what they chose and what it cost them, and that is its own kind of answer. The morning after the trial at Night Roar was not loud. It was not celebratory in the announced, banner-waving sense. It had the specific quality of a place that has just resolved something large and is breathing again, not exhaling dramatically, just breathing at the normal rate of things. Wolves who had not known Iveria well before the trial found reasons to meet her eyes in corridors now, to offer the direct, uncomplicated nod of people who have no complicated feelings about the interaction. People who had known her even a little, Jorven's steady greeting at breakfast, and one of the younger warriors who had trained nearby her multiple times, giving her a brief, genuine smile in the gate corridor, carried a quality in their acknowledgement that had the particular warmth of confirmation, of having believed something quietly and been proven right. At the morning meal, Haver stood up without warning. He was not a man who gave speeches. This was understood by everyone present. He stood up and said, "But without any preamble or build-up, I believed in her from the first night. Someone who can look you directly in the eyes when they are that close to their limit has more going on inside them than what is visible from the outside." He sat back down. He refused to elaborate. He ate his breakfast. The room laughed for a solid 30 seconds. Iveria put her face briefly in her hands. Then she straightened and found Arkan at the other end of the long table, watching her with the quiet, the warm expression that she had learned by now was the one he reserved for moments when something was happening that he thought was good and didn't need him to say anything about. She shook her head at him. He looked down at his food. The corner of his mouth moved. 3 weeks after the trial, Briastra Silverhowl came to Night Roar. She arrived alone. No escort, no armor, no official delegation. Ordinary traveling clothes. She asked at the gate to speak with Alpha Arkan and his Luna. Both. This detail was noted by the Gatewolf and reached Iveria before Briastra had been shown to the council room, because the Night Roar wolves were, as a general characteristic, people who paid attention and passed on what they noticed. Both. Not Arkan first and then Iveria by extension. Both, simultaneously, as though she had considered the precedent of this detail carefully before she arrived. She sat down across from them both and looked at them both with the same direct attention. And then she said what she had come to say, in the plain and organized way of someone who has been composing this for 3 weeks and has cut everything except what matters. Luthar's alliance agreements are deteriorating. Key wolves are leaving. The Northern Territory Pack has been pressing the border for 2 seasons, and he does not have the political relationships to address it. I believe Night Roar does. She laid a folded paper on the table, a formal peace proposal, with terms. They're written in her own hand. I am representing Iron Vale in this proposal. I have the authority to do so. Iveria looked at the paper, then at Briastra. What do you want in return? Briastra met her gaze. A neutral residence in Night Roar territory. I am currently the Iron Vale Luna. That will be changing. The room was quiet for a moment. We will need Jorven and the full council to review the terms, Iveria said. And we will need something from Alpha Wolfcrest directly. In writing, as with his seal, not a proxy agreement. I can get that. Then we will talk. Briastra stood. She gathered her folded papers. At the door she paused. She turned and looked at Iveria. Only at Iveria, the way she had sat across from both of them, but now had something to say to one of them specifically. For what it's worth, she said, and her voice had lost its formal quality, just for a moment. I knew from the first week that he was wrong. I didn't have standing in any form that would have made a difference to anyone if I had said so. I am sorry I didn't find a form that worked anyway. She left. The room was quiet. Arkan looked at Iveria. Do you trust her? Iveria thought about this for a genuine moment. Not performing consideration, actually considering. I think she is telling the truth, and I think she is very tired of cleaning up after someone else's mistakes and wants a way out. A pause. Both things can be true at once. Arkan was quiet. Then, "You are going to be very good at this." "At what?" "Leading." She looked at him. The word settled differently than anything else that had been said to her in recent memory, not because it was larger or louder, but because it came from the one person she had learned, over the course of 6 weeks, meant exactly what he said. He did not say things for effect. He said them because they were accurate. She held the word carefully. He signed the peace agreement 11 days after the trial. Briastra had returned to Iron Vale after her visit to Night Raw and had done something she hadn't done in 6 weeks of holding the position of Iron Vale Luna. She stopped asking and started requiring. A shift so quiet that it took Luthar 3 days to fully register what had changed. She required the terms be reviewed, required the northern border strategy be addressed, required the agreement be signed in writing with his seal. She did these things in the specific way of someone who has nothing left to lose from this particular person's opinion of her, and is therefore, at last, completely free to do what is actually correct. He signed it because Briastra had stopped asking. He signed it because the Northern Territory problem had run out of alternative solutions that did not involve this negotiation. He signed it with the slow deliberateness of a man doing something he does not like and has not yet worked out how to make peace with, and that was as much self-awareness as the situation produced from him in these early weeks. Darnok, honest-faced, quick-reading, constitutionally unsuited to pretending everything was fine when it was not, transferred to Night Raw 6 weeks after the trial. He submitted the request himself. Yorvan read it again, and walked it directly to Arkan's receiving room. Within a month, Darnok was one of Yorvan's most relied-upon colleagues. His particular gifts, reading situations accurately, not performing comfort he did not feel, turned out to be not just acceptable but actively valuable in a pack whose leadership prized precision over appearance. She did not build through territorial expansion. She did not build through formal policy announcements or visible campaigns. And she built the way she had built every meaningful thing in her life, through paying attention to the people that rooms tended to overlook and making those people feel known. When she traveled with Arkan to neighboring packs for alliance visits, she was present in every official meeting at his side, and separately. In the gaps, in the spaces between formal sittings, she had different conversations, with Lunas who managed the daily weight of pack life while the Alphas managed its politics, with healers who dealt with bond disorders in the gaps between the conditions the formal medical records acknowledged, with the wolves who organized food distribution in hard seasons, and the ones who looked after young wolves arriving alone from distant packs with no one who knew their names yet. She learned every name, every time. She made certain of it. In the season following the trial, she brought a proposal to Arkan and the Senior Council for the first interpack healer exchange program. 5 packs, sharing knowledge and resources across borders, with specific research emphasis on incomplete mate bond disorders, the kind that killed people quietly and slowly in the spaces between formal pack records. Lyarissa came to Night Raw for the planning session, or she sat across from Iveria at the long table in the map room, and they built the structure of the exchange together: curriculum, staffing, case-sharing protocols, the specific provisions for cases involving broken bonds of the kind that had nearly killed Iveria 6 months ago. In its first season, the exchange saved 4 lives. Lyarissa reported this to Iveria in a letter with the same practical, unsentimental tone she brought to everything, and it was more significant than any of the ceremony around it. Gwindra continued to train with her for 6 full months after the trial. The understanding between them had shifted by then. They both knew it. Neither of them made a formal statement about it. Gwindra no longer set the sessions. Iveria invited them. One morning, early, before the rest of the compound was moving, Gwindra threw a sparring pad at her head from across the training ground without any warning whatsoever. Iveria caught it without thinking, without having seen it coming, which should have been impossible. "You're past trainee level," Gwindra said, from across the ground. "I know." Iveria tossed the pad back. "I'm not here to be trained. I'm here to train with you. There's a difference." Gwindra caught the pad, looked at her for a moment, then picked up a second pad from the rack beside her. And she smiled. The full version. Not the one she reserved for moments of dry observation, but the one that arrived when she had been genuinely pleased, which was not frequent, and therefore meant something. New spring, the second season after the trial. Arkan found her at the compound wall, the place at the top of the eastern ridge where the timber met the edge of the natural rise, and you could see out past the training ground, past the dark line of the Ashenfang forest, all the way to the mountains on the horizon. The same mountains she had crossed alone 6 months ago, or in a torn ceremonial dress, in the bone-white cold of a midnight that had felt, in some moments of the crossing, like it might be the last midnight she would ever see. He stood beside her. The spring night was cool and clear, and the mountains were pale shapes against a dark sky that was beginning, at the very eastern edge, to hint at the first grey of approaching dawn. "What are you looking at?" he asked. "Nothing specific," she said. She did not take her eyes off the horizon. "Well, I like looking at places from height. You can see how things connect, how one road leads to another." He was quiet beside her. They stood together in the way they had been standing together for 6 months now, with the ease of two people who have learned each other's weight and presence well enough that proximity is simply comfortable, the way a familiar room is comfortable. No effort in it. Just the natural arrangement of two people who belong in each other's space. And after a while he said, "When you arrived at my border, I thought you were going to be a problem." She looked at him. The corner of her mouth moved. "I am a problem." "The best kind," he said. He put his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, and it was entirely natural, not the careful, measured lean of someone still working out the geometry of two people fitting together, but the easy weight of someone who knows exactly where to put themselves and has stopped thinking about it. The mountains were pale and still. The moon was rising over the eastern ridge, full and clear, with none of the bone-white cold of that other midnight 6 months ago. No watching quality, no particular charged significance, just the moon, doing what the moon does, rising over the mountains in the spring dark. Beautiful, simply and completely. She had stopped counting moons as measurements of what she had lost. She could not say when exactly. It was not a moment with an edge to it. It was more like the way ice melts in a river, gradually, and then one morning you look and it is gone, and you do not know which specific hour it finished. She looked at the mountains she had crossed alone, the mountains that had looked, from the Iron Vale side, like a wall, and from this side looked like the beginning of something you could walk toward and come back from and walk toward again. She had crossed them once, with nothing. She would cross them again, whenever she chose, with everything. The bond in her chest, the new one, the clean one, the one she had chosen with her own voice in a trial circle in front of 7 territories, was warm and steady and completely, entirely hers. She did not say any of this. She did not need to. Arkan's arm was steady around her shoulders, and the mountains were pale in the early spring dark, and the moon was rising, and it was, finally and simply, beautiful.